The Wyoming sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, as Willow Foster clutched her wailing 3-month-old son to her chest, desperately trying to soothe him as they stood on the wooden platform of the Sweetwater station. It was 1878, and the Northern Pacific Railroad had just deposited her in this dusty Wyoming Territory town with nothing but 2 worn leather trunks, a crying baby, and a heart full of shattered dreams. "Hush now, Samuel," she whispered, bouncing the infant gently as tears threatened to spill from her own eyes. Her arms ached from holding him for the entire 16-hour journey from Denver, and the stares of annoyed passengers only intensified her feelings of helplessness. "Please, sweetheart." "Mama's trying." Samuel's cries grew louder, his tiny face flushed red with exertion. The few remaining passengers hurried past, eager to escape the sound of the distressed infant. Willow felt utterly alone, stranded in a town where she knew no one, with night approaching and nowhere to go. "Looks like the little fella's had a rough journey." The deep voice startled her. Willow turned to find a tall man standing a respectful distance away, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. His face was partially shadowed by a well-worn Stetson, but she could make out a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. "He's been crying since Denver," Willow admitted, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "I've tried everything." The stranger took a step closer, and now she could see his face, clearly sun-bronzed skin, kind blue eyes that crinkled at the corners, and a gentle smile that somehow didn't seem threatening despite his imposing height. "May I?" he asked, extending his hands. "Let me hold him." "I'll hold you too if you need it. You look about ready to collapse." Willow hesitated, clutching Samuel closer to her chest. In the 3 months since Samuel's birth, no one had offered to help her, not even once. "I promise I'm good with little ones," the man said. "My sister has 3 of her own. Name's Blake Morgan." Perhaps it was exhaustion or desperation, but something in his eyes made Willow trust him. She carefully passed Samuel to Blake, who took the baby with surprising gentleness for such large, calloused hands. "Well now, partner," Blake said softly to the baby, cradling him against his chest with one arm while his other went around Willow's shoulders, steadying her swaying form. "That's quite a set of lungs you've got there." To Willow's astonishment, Samuel's cries began to quiet almost immediately. The baby hiccuped a few times before fixing his watery blue eyes on the stranger's face with apparent fascination. "How did you do that?" Willow asked, leaning unconsciously into the man's partial embrace, her exhaustion momentarily overriding her usual caution around strangers. Blake chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Sometimes they just need a change of arms, and sometimes," he added, looking down at her with unexpected tenderness, "their mamas need a pair of arms too." Willow felt tears welling in her eyes again, but for an entirely different reason. It had been so long since anyone had shown her kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Willow Foster, and that's Samuel." "Where are you headed, Miss Foster?" Blake asked, still supporting both her and the now quiet baby. Willow's silence told him everything he needed to know. "You don't have a place to stay, do you?" His voice held no judgment, just quiet understanding. She shook her head, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I was supposed to take a position as a schoolteacher, but when I arrived in Denver with Samuel." Her voice trailed off. "They didn't want a teacher with a baby," Blake finished for her, his jaw tightening slightly. "I spent nearly everything I had on this ticket north. I heard Wyoming Territory is more welcoming to women on their own." Blake nodded. "That it is. My sister runs the Sweetwater Inn just up the street. She'll have a room for you and the little one." He nodded toward her trunks. "Those yours?" When Willow nodded, Blake shifted Samuel more securely in one arm and bent to hoist one of the trunks with his free hand. "I can't possibly impose," Willow began. "It's no imposition. Margaret would have my hide if I left a mother and baby stranded at the station." His smile was warm, genuine. "Besides, Samuel here and I are getting acquainted. Aren't we, partner?" The baby made a contented gurgling sound in response, his tiny hand wrapped around Blake's finger. Something fluttered in Willow's chest, something she thought had died the night Samuel's father had walked out on her upon learning she was with child. But as she watched this kind stranger holding her son with such care, she felt the smallest spark of hope ignite within her. Just for tonight, she agreed, reaching for the other trunk. Blake quickly stepped forward. I'll come back for that one. You just stay close to me and Samuel. As they walked away from the station toward the town's main street, Willow couldn't help but wonder if this unexpected kindness might be the beginning of something new, a fresh start in this wild frontier town, where a cowboy had offered to hold both her baby and her troubles, if only for a little while. The Sweetwater Inn stood 2 stories tall at the edge of town, its weathered clapboard exterior belying the warm glow emanating from its windows. As Blake led Willow up the steps to the porch, the door swung open to reveal a plump woman with graying hair twisted into a neat bun, her face instantly lighting up at the sight of them. "Blake Morgan, what have you brought home this time?" she asked, her tone more curious than accusatory as her eyes fell on Willow and then the baby in Blake's arms. "Margaret, this is Miss Willow Foster and her son Samuel. They just arrived on the evening train and need a place to stay," Blake explained, passing Samuel back to Willow as they entered the inn's warm interior. Margaret's sharp eyes took in Willow's exhausted appearance, the simple cut of her travel-worn dress, and the absence of a wedding ring. Instead of judgment, her face softened with understanding. "Well, you've come to the right place, dear. We've got a nice room at the back that'll give you some peace and quiet." She extended her hands toward Samuel. "May I? It's been too long since I've held a little one." Once again, Willow found herself surrendering her son to a stranger, but Margaret handled him with the practiced ease of a woman who had raised children of her own. "He's beautiful," Margaret said, smiling down at the baby. "How old?" 3 months, Willow replied, watching as Samuel seemed perfectly content in yet another set of unfamiliar arms. "He's usually not so agreeable with strangers," Margaret laughed. "Morgans have a way with children. Our mother always said it was because we were all such babies ourselves." She threw a teasing glance at her brother. Blake rolled his eyes good-naturedly as he set down Willow's trunk. "I'll fetch the other one and bring it up to your room." As he headed back toward the station, Margaret guided Willow to a small dining room where a few guests were finishing their evening meal. "You must be starving, dear. Sit and have some stew while I show this young gentleman around." Before Willow could protest, a bowl of fragrant beef stew and a plate of fresh bread appeared before her. The first spoonful nearly brought tears to her eyes. It had been days since she'd had a proper meal, stretching her meager funds as far as possible. When Blake returned with her second trunk, he set it by the stairs and joined her at the table, accepting a bowl of stew from his sister. "So what brings you to Sweetwater?" he asked, breaking off a piece of bread. Willow hesitated, weighing how much to share with these strangers who had shown her such kindness. "I'm looking for work. I was trained as a teacher back east, but having a baby complicates things," Margaret finished, returning with Samuel sleeping contentedly in her arms. "Well, as it happens, Sweetwater's been without a proper teacher for nearly 6 months. The last one ran off with a cattle buyer heading to Montana." Willow's heart quickened. "Are you saying there might be a position available?" Blake nodded. "Town council's been looking to hire someone. Schoolhouse is small but sound. About 15 children of varying ages, I'd reckon. But Samuel," Willow began, looking at her sleeping son. "Wouldn't be the first teacher to bring a baby to school," Margaret said matter-of-factly, "and I'd be happy to mind him when needed. These old hands miss having little ones to care for." Hope bloomed in Willow's chest, a fragile, tentative thing, but present nonetheless. "I wouldn't want to impose any further than I already have." Blake's eyes met hers across the table. "It's no imposition. Sweetwater looks after its own." "But I'm not, you are now," he said simply, with a certainty that warmed her more than the stew. After finishing her meal, Margaret showed Willow to a small but clean room at the back of the inn. A bed with a patchwork quilt occupied one corner, while a handcrafted cradle stood nearby. "This was my son's," Margaret explained, gently laying Samuel in the cradle. "He's grown now with children of his own up in Montana. I've kept it for visitors with little ones." Willow ran her fingers over the smooth wood, polished by years of use. "Thank you for everything." Margaret patted her hand. "Get some rest, dear. Things always look brighter in the morning." Left alone with her sleeping son, Willow sank onto the bed, the day's events washing over her. From desperation at the train station to this unexpected haven, all because a kind-eyed cowboy had offered to hold her baby when no one else would. As sleep claimed her, she wondered what tomorrow might bring in this small frontier town where strangers had already shown her more kindness than she'd known in months. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the curtains and the unfamiliar sound of Samuel not crying. Willow bolted upright, panic seizing her until she spotted Margaret by the window, gently rocking her son. "He's an early riser," Margaret said softly. "I heard him fussing when I came to check on you and thought you could use the sleep." Willow pushed her tangled hair from her face, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have to." Margaret waved away her apologies. "Nonsense. I've brought up some hot water for washing and there's breakfast downstairs when you're ready." She handed Samuel to Willow. "This young man's already been fed and changed." Before Willow could properly thank her, Margaret had slipped from the room, leaving behind the promised basin of steaming water. 30 minutes later, feeling refreshed in her second-best dress, the only other one she owned besides her travel clothes, Willow descended the stairs with Samuel in her arms. The dining room held several guests, but her eyes immediately found Blake, who stood when he saw her. "Morning," he greeted, his eyes crinkling with a smile. "Sleep well, better than I have in months," Willow admitted, sliding into the chair he held for her. "Your sister is an angel," Blake chuckled. "Don't let her hear you say that. She prefers formidable force of nature." Margaret appeared with a plate of eggs and bacon, accompanied by a cup of steaming coffee. "Eat up, dear. Blake's taking you to meet Mayor Hollister about the teaching position after breakfast." Willow nearly choked on her first sip of coffee. "Today. But I'm not prepared. I haven't got my references organized, and I brought what you need," Blake said confidently. "Sweetwater isn't big on formalities. Mayor's more interested in whether you can teach reading and figures than what some fancy Eastern references say." As they spoke, the door to the inn swung open, admitting a well-dressed man in his 50s, his silver hair contrasting with his neatly trimmed black beard. "Morning, Mayor," Blake called. "Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet Miss Willow Foster." Mayor Hollister approached their table, his shrewd eyes taking in Willow and Samuel in one glance. "Blake mentioned we might have a new school teacher in town." Willow stood, balancing Samuel on her hip as she extended her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. I understand you're in need of a teacher." "Desperately," the mayor confirmed, shaking her hand. "Children are running wild, parents are at their wits' end, and businesses are suffering because older children are needed at home to watch the younger ones. I was trained at the Pendleton Female Seminary in Massachusetts," Willow said, finding her confidence. "I've taught children from ages 5 to 16 in all standard subjects." The mayor's eyebrows rose. "That's more qualification than we've ever had." "But," he added, glancing at Samuel, "teaching with an infant will be challenging." "I'm aware, sir, but I can assure you Samuel is a good baby and I'm no stranger to challenges." Something in her tone must have conveyed her determination, for the mayor nodded slowly. "The schoolhouse needs some attention. Been empty these past months, but it could be ready by Monday next." Willow's heart leaped. "I could start immediately with preparations, and perhaps meet some of the families beforehand." "Eager, I like that." Mayor Hollister smiled. "Blake can show you the schoolhouse today, and we'll hold a town meeting tomorrow evening to introduce you. Salary's $40 a month, with the teachers' quarters attached to the schoolhouse." It was more than Willow had dared hope for, not just employment, but a home for her and Samuel. "Thank you, Mayor Hollister. I won't disappoint you." After the mayor departed, Willow sat back down, her hands trembling slightly. Blake reached across the table, briefly covering her hand with his. "You did fine," he assured her. "Hollister's impressed, I can tell." "I can't believe it happened so quickly," Willow said, bouncing Samuel gently as he began to fuss. "Yesterday I had nothing, and today." "Today you're Sweetwater's new schoolteacher," Blake finished, his smile warming her more than the morning sun. "Finish your breakfast, then I'll take you and Samuel to see your new home." The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with a small attached dwelling at the back. As Blake helped Willow down from his wagon, Samuel secured in a sling across her chest, she took in the weathered clapboard structure with its sagging porch steps and dusty windows. It needs work, Blake acknowledged, following her gaze, but it's solid. Built it myself with some of the other men 5 years back. Willow looked at him in surprise. You're a builder, Blake shrugged. Rancher mostly, but out here everyone turns their hand to what needs doing. He produced a key and unlocked the door. After you, Miss Foster. Inside, dust motes danced in the streams of sunlight filtering through the windows. Rows of simple benches faced a teacher's desk on a raised platform. A blackboard covered most of one wall, while a pot-bellied stove stood cold in the corner. It's perfect, Willow breathed, already envisioning the space filled with children, the blackboard covered with lessons, books lining the crude shelves along the back wall. Blake watched her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Living quarters are through here, he said, leading her to a door at the back of the classroom. The attached dwelling was small but practical, a main room with a cookstove and table, a bedroom just large enough for a bed and cradle, and a small pantry. Like the schoolhouse, it was dusty from disuse, but Willow could see its potential. The town provides firewood for the winter, Blake explained, opening the pantry to show her the empty shelves. And there's a well out back shared with the Petersons next door. Willow turned slowly, taking it all in her first real home since leaving her parents' house in Massachusetts 2 years earlier. What do you think? Blake asked, his voice softer than before. I think, Willow said, shifting Samuel to her other arm, that for the first time in a very long time I might be exactly where I'm supposed to be. Blake's smile transformed his face, making him look younger, less weathered by the frontier life. I think you might be right about that, Miss Foster. As they stepped back outside, a woman with a young girl in tow approached from the neighboring house. Blake Morgan, is that you skulking around the schoolhouse? She called, her tone friendly despite her words. Mrs. Peterson, Blake greeted her. Just showing our new teacher her accommodations. Miss Willow Foster, this is Sarah Peterson and her daughter Emma. Mrs. Peterson's face lit up. A new teacher. Oh, thank the Lord. Emma here has been driving me to distraction with no school to occupy her. The girl, who appeared to be about 8, gazed up at Willow with undisguised curiosity. Is that your baby? She asked, pointing at Samuel. Emma, her mother scolded. Manners. It's quite all right, Willow assured her. Yes, this is my son, Samuel. He's 3 months old. Emma nodded seriously. I can help with him during lessons. I'm very good with babies. My aunt had twins last year and I helped her lots. Willow exchanged an amused glance with Blake before addressing the girl. That's very kind of you, Emma. I might take you up on that offer. By the time they returned to the inn, word of Sweetwater's new schoolteacher had spread through town. Several people stopped to introduce themselves, each expressing relief that their children would soon be back in school. I'd say you've made quite an impression already, Blake remarked as they climbed the steps to the inn's porch. And you haven't even taught a single lesson yet. Willow shifted Samuel, who had fallen asleep during their tour of the town. They're just desperate for anyone to take their children off their hands for a few hours each day. Blake's laugh rumbled through the air between them. Maybe so, but I think they're also taken with you. Before Willow could respond, Margaret appeared in the doorway. There you are. I was beginning to think Blake had kidnapped you both. She ushered them inside. Come along, several ladies from town have dropped by with things for you and the baby. Word travels fast in Sweetwater. In the inn's sitting room, Willow found a collection of items spread across the sofa: baby clothes, a patchwork quilt, jars of preserved fruits, and even a set of primers and chalk for the school. I don't understand, Willow said, overwhelmed by the generosity. They don't even know me. That's not how it works out here, Blake explained, his voice gentle. Folks look after each other. It's the only way to survive. As Willow examined the gifts, tears threatening to spill over, she realized something profound had happened in the span of less than 24 hours. She had arrived in Sweetwater a desperate woman with nothing but a crying baby and 2 trunks. Now she had a job, a home, and what appeared to be the beginning of a community that cared. And it had all started with a kind cowboy who'd offered to hold her son when no one else would. Looking up, she found Blake watching her, his blue eyes warm with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. But for the first time since Samuel was born, Willow felt something stirring within her, a feeling that had nothing to do with motherhood and everything to do with the man standing before her. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity as Willow prepared for her new role. Blake proved invaluable, organizing a group of men to clean and repair the schoolhouse while Margaret helped Willow settle into the attached living quarters. Women from town appeared throughout the days, bringing household necessities, food, and advice about Sweetwater and its inhabitants. By Friday evening, the schoolhouse gleamed with fresh scrubbed floors and windows. New chalk lined the blackboard tray, and Willow's small home was cozy and functional. The town meeting to introduce her was held in the church, the only building large enough to accommodate most of Sweetwater's residents. Mayor Hollister proudly presented her to the gathering, and Willow, with Samuel sleeping against her shoulder, addressed her new neighbors with more confidence than she truly felt. "I promise to provide your children with the best education possible," she concluded. "And I thank you all for welcoming my son and me so warmly." As families approached afterward to introduce themselves and their children, Willow spotted Blake standing at the back of the church, his tall frame leaning against the wall. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and his encouraging smile gave her strength. Later, as Blake walked her and Samuel home under a canopy of stars, Willow found herself wondering how this man had become so important to her in less than a week. "You were wonderful tonight," he said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "The whole town is smitten," Willow laughed softly. "Hardly, but they seem willing to give me a chance, which is more than I dared hope for." They reached the schoolhouse, and Blake followed her up the newly repaired steps. In the silver moonlight, his face looked younger, almost boyish despite the stubble along his jaw. "I should let you get some rest," he said, though he made no move to leave. "Monday will be here before you know it." "Blake," Willow began, suddenly needing to express her gratitude, "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." He shook his head. "You don't need to thank me." "But I do," she insisted. "If you hadn't been at the station that day, if you hadn't offered to help when Samuel was crying, then someone else would have," he said. Though they both knew that wasn't true, Willow shifted Samuel to her other shoulder, gathering her courage. "Would you like to come in for some coffee?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple invitation. Blake's eyes searched hers, and whatever he found there made him nod slowly. "I'd like that very much," he said, his voice rougher than before. Inside, Willow laid Samuel in his cradle before lighting the lamp and tending to the small cook stove. Blake removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair as he took in the transformation of the space. "You've made it a home already," he observed. Willow smiled, pleased by his notice. "It doesn't take much. Some curtains, a quilt or two, and someone to care for it," Blake added softly. As she prepared the coffee, Willow found herself sharing stories of her life before Sweetwater, her childhood in Massachusetts, her training at the seminary, her brief position as a companion to a wealthy widow in Boston. But she carefully avoided any mention of Samuel's father. Blake, in turn, told her about growing up in Wyoming territory, the ranch he was building 10 miles outside of town, and his dreams for its future. 1,500 acres, he said proudly. "Started with nothing but 100 head of cattle and a run-down cabin 5 years ago. Now I've got a proper house, 300 head, and 2 good men working for me." "It sounds wonderful," Willow said, genuinely impressed. "Will you bring your cattle to town in the spring?" Blake nodded. "For the cattle, drive north. But I'm hoping to expand enough that I won't need to drive them to market myself much longer." Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences and the occasional stirring from Samuel. When the clock on the mantel chimed midnight, Blake reluctantly stood. "I should go." "You need your rest before the school week starts." At the door he paused, hat in hand. "Willow," he said, her name sounding different somehow in his deep voice, "I'd like to call on you properly, if that would be agreeable." Her heart fluttered in her chest. "It would be very agreeable," she managed to say. The smile that spread across his face was worth any risk to her still healing heart. "Good," he said simply. "That's good." After he left, Willow stood at the window, watching his tall figure disappear down the moonlit street. For the first time in over a year, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included more than just survival, one that might include love again. Monday morning arrived with a knot of nerves in Willow's stomach as she prepared for her first day of teaching. She dressed carefully in her best skirt and shirtwaist, fed and changed Samuel, and arranged the cradle in a corner of the classroom where she could see him but where he wouldn't distract the students. Children began arriving shortly before 8 o'clock, some accompanied by parents eager to meet the new teacher, others arriving in giggling groups. By 8, 15 students ranging in age from 5 to 16 filled the benches, their curious eyes fixed on Willow and the baby in the corner. "Good morning," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm Miss Foster, and I'm very pleased to be your teacher." From the back row, a boy of about 14 called out, "Is that your baby, miss?" Before Willow could answer, Emma Peterson turned in her seat. "Of course it's her baby, Caleb Sullivan. Don't be stupid." "Emma," Willow said gently, "we don't call our classmates stupid. But yes, Caleb, that is my son, Samuel. He'll be with us sometimes, but I hope he won't disturb our lessons too much." As if on cue, Samuel began to fuss. Willow's heart sank. She'd hoped he would sleep through at least part of the morning. But before she could move toward him, Emma was out of her seat. "I can rock him, Miss Foster. Like I said I would." Willow hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, Emma. Just for a few minutes, then back to your seat." With Emma tending to Samuel, Willow turned her attention to assessing her students' knowledge levels. By midday, she had a clear picture of what each child needed. The older boys were behind in mathematics, but skilled in practical subjects. The girls were generally better readers, but needed work on geography and history. The youngest children required the most basic instruction in letters and numbers. At noon, she dismissed them for lunch, watching as they scattered to nearby homes or opened lunch pails at their desks. She had just settled to feed Samuel when a knock at the door revealed Blake standing there with a basket in hand. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, stepping inside. "Margaret packed enough for 3, but I reckon Samuel's still on milk." Willow laughed, genuinely delighted by his thoughtfulness. "He is, but I'm famished, thank you." Blake set the basket on her desk, his eyes taking in the classroom. "How's the first day going?" "Better than I expected," Willow admitted. "The children are eager to learn, and Emma Peterson has appointed herself Samuel's official caretaker." Blake grinned. Sarah mentioned Emma was excited about the baby, said she talked of nothing else all weekend. As they shared the lunch of cold chicken, bread, and apple pie, Blake told her about his morning at the ranch and his plans for the coming cattle season. Willow found herself relaxing in his company, the morning's tension easing from her shoulders. All too soon, children began returning for the afternoon session. Blake stood, collecting the remains of their lunch. "I'll stop by later," he said, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "To walk you home." Willow smiled up at him. "It's only across the yard." "Even so," he replied, his eyes warm. "A gentleman always sees a lady home." The afternoon passed quickly, and by dismissal time, Willow felt a sense of accomplishment despite her exhaustion. She had survived her first day as Sweetwater's teacher, and Samuel had been remarkably cooperative, sleeping through most of the afternoon lessons. As the last student departed, Blake appeared in the doorway as promised, hat in hand. "Ready for your escort home, Miss Foster?" he asked, his eyes crinkling with humor. Willow gathered Samuel and her teaching materials. "I am indeed, Mr. Morgan." He offered his arm, and she took it, feeling strangely formal yet comfortable as they crossed the schoolyard to her small dwelling. At her door, Blake hesitated. "Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you this Sunday? Perhaps take you and Samuel for a drive out to the ranch?" Willow felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "Not too forward at all. We'd be delighted." His smile was worth any amount of town gossip their outing might generate. "Until Sunday, then." As he walked away, Willow hugged Samuel close, whispering into his downy hair, "What do you think of him, little one? I find I'm rather fond of Mr. Morgan." Samuel's only response was a contented gurgle, but Willow took it as approval nonetheless. The rest of the week established a rhythm to Willow's new life. Each day, she taught from 8 until 3, with Emma Peterson eagerly helping with Samuel during lessons. Each afternoon, Blake appeared to walk her the short distance home. sometimes staying for coffee, other times merely seeing her to her door with a tip of his hat. By Saturday, word had spread through town about Blake Morgan's apparent interest in the new schoolteacher. Several of the women who visited Willow that day found reasons to mention what a fine catch the rancher was. "Never thought I'd see the day Blake Morgan came courting," Mrs. Sullivan remarked as she delivered a basket of eggs. "Man's been married to that ranch of his for years." "He's not courting me," Willow protested, though her heart skipped at the thought. "He's simply being neighborly." Mrs. Sullivan's knowing smile said she believed otherwise. "Neighborly doesn't usually involve daily visits and Sunday drives, my dear." After she left, Willow found herself standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection with a critical eye. At 23, she was still young, but the past year had left its mark faint shadows beneath her eyes, a certain wariness in her expression. Yet there was something new there too, a spark that hadn't been present when she'd arrived in Sweetwater a week earlier. Sunday dawned clear and bright. Willow dressed Samuel in his best gown, one of the hand-me-downs provided by the town's women, and chose her own Sunday dress with particular care. The pale blue cotton complemented her dark hair and brought out the color in her gray eyes. Blake arrived precisely at noon, driving a well-maintained buggy pulled by a handsome bay horse. He had traded his usual work clothes for a clean shirt and vest, his dark hair still damp from washing. "You look beautiful," he said simply as he helped her into the buggy, carefully taking Samuel from her arms to allow her to settle her skirts. "Thank you," Willow replied, accepting Samuel back once she was seated. "You clean up rather nicely yourself, Mr. Morgan." His laugh was warm as he climbed up beside her. "Been a while since I had reason to wear my Sunday best, but I figured meeting a lady for a drive warranted the effort." As they drove through town, Willow was acutely aware of the glances and smiles directed their way. By tomorrow, everyone in Sweetwater would be discussing their outing. "Does it bother you?" Blake asked, clearly noticing her awareness of the attention. The talk, Willow considered the question honestly. "Not as much as it perhaps should. Does it bother you?" A respectable rancher being seen with a woman of uncertain background, Blake's hands tightened on the reins. "There's nothing uncertain about you, Willow Foster. You're Sweetwater's schoolteacher and Samuel's mother. That's all anyone needs to know." His defense warmed her, but Willow knew the world wasn't so simple. Not everyone will see it that way. "Then they don't matter," Blake said firmly. "The only opinions I care about are yours and Samuel's." He glanced down at the baby sleeping in her arms, though he seems easy to please so far. Willow laughed, the tension breaking. "Only because you haven't seen him at 3 in the morning. The road leading out of town wound through rolling hills covered with spring grasses and wildflowers." Blake pointed out landmarks as they traveled the creek where the town got its name, the distant mountains that marked the territory's northern boundary, the occasional homestead nestled in the sheltering curves of the land. 10 miles from town, they crested a hill and Blake drew the horse to a halt. "There it is," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "Morgan Ranch." Below them stretched a verdant valley bisected by a clear stream. A substantial log house stood near a cluster of outbuildings with corrals and pastures spreading outward. Cattle dotted the landscape, dark shapes against the green grass. "It's beautiful," Willow said sincerely. "You've built something remarkable here." Blake's expression softened as he gazed at his land. "Been a lot of work, still is, but it's mine, something to pass on someday." The way his eyes flickered to Samuel suggested thoughts Blake wasn't ready to voice, and Willow felt her heart quicken. It was too soon for such considerations, yet she couldn't help the flutter of possibility that his words awakened. As they approached the ranch house, 2 men emerged from one of the outbuildings. Blake raised a hand in greeting before helping Willow down from the buggy. "Miss Foster, meet Jim Hawkins and Pete Wilson, the best ranch hands in Wyoming territory." The men removed their hats, eyeing Willow and Samuel with undisguised curiosity. Jim, the older of the two, stepped forward first. "Pleasure to meet you, madam. Boss has mentioned you once or twice." "Or maybe 100 times." Blake's ears reddened. "That'll be enough, Jim." The men chuckled but retreated to their tasks after a few more pleasantries, leaving Blake to show Willow and Samuel around the ranch. The house itself was surprisingly comfortable, larger than Willow had expected, with sturdy furniture that Blake admitted his sister had helped him select. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, with a kitchen and 2 bedrooms extending off the central space. "It's not fancy," Blake said, watching her reaction carefully, "but it's solid, built it to last." "It's wonderful," Willow told him honestly. "A real home." Something in Blake's expression suggested her approval meant more to him than he was willing to say. He cleared his throat, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Margaret packed us a picnic. Thought we might eat by the creek if you'd like." The spot he chose was idyllic, a grassy bank beside the stream, shaded by cottonwoods whose new leaves fluttered in the gentle breeze. Blake spread a blanket, then helped Willow settle with Samuel before unpacking the basket his sister had prepared. As they ate, Blake told stories of his early days on the ranch, the harsh winter that nearly broke him, the first successful spring calving, the gradual expansion of his herd and land. "What about you?" he asked eventually. "You've told me about your teaching, but not much else." Willow hesitated, Samuel a warm weight against her chest as he nursed beneath a light blanket for modesty. The question she'd been dreading had finally come. "What would you like to know?" She asked, buying time. Blake's eyes were kind but direct. "Whatever you want to tell me, including about Samuel's father if you're willing." Willow took a deep breath. "His name was Charles Ellsworth. He was the son of the woman I worked for in Boston, the widow I mentioned. We became close during my employment. When I discovered I was with child, I told him, expecting." She faltered. "Expecting him to do right by you," Blake finished, no judgment in his tone. Willow nodded. "Instead, he denied everything. Said I was trying to trap him into marriage for his family's money. His mother believed him, of course. I was dismissed without references, with only what savings I had." Blake's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists before deliberately relaxing. "What did you do?" "The only thing I could. I found lodging in a respectable boarding house and took in sewing until Samuel was born. Afterward, I saw the advertisement for the teaching position in Denver. And they rejected you because of Samuel," Blake said, the story coming full circle. Willow nodded. "With what remained of my money, I bought a ticket north. I'd heard Wyoming territory was more progressive about women on their own. I'm glad you came here," Blake said softly, "to Sweetwater, to the station that day." The simplicity of his statement brought tears to Willow's eyes. "So am I." Blake reached across the blanket, his large hand covering hers. "Charles Ellsworth is a fool, Willow Foster, and someday Samuel will be proud to have you as his mother, no matter the circumstances of his birth." In that moment, with the Wyoming sun warming her face and Blake's hand steady on hers, Willow felt something fundamental shift within her. The shame and fear that had been her constant companions since discovering her pregnancy began to recede, replaced by a cautious hope for the future. A future that, perhaps, might include the man sitting across from her. Spring deepened into summer, and Willow found herself settling into life in Sweetwater with an ease that sometimes surprised her. The school term progressed well, with her students showing marked improvement under her guidance. Samuel thrived, growing plumper and more alert each day, often watched over by Emma Peterson during lessons. And Blake. Blake became a fixture in her life, stopping by the schoolhouse most afternoons, taking her and Samuel for Sunday drives to his ranch, bringing small gifts, a book she'd mentioned wanting to read, a toy he'd carved for Samuel, wildflowers gathered on his ride to town. By July, even Willow had to admit that what had begun as neighborly kindness had blossomed into something far more significant. Blake Morgan was courting her, with an old-fashioned thoroughness that touched her deeply. Yet she held back a part of herself, afraid to trust completely, to believe that this good, honorable man could truly want a future with her and another man's child. One stifling July afternoon, Blake arrived at the schoolhouse after lessons to find Willow attempting to teach with all the windows open, her face flushed with heat. "This won't do," he declared, surveying the stuffy classroom. "The creek on my property is cool even in this heat. Let me take you and Samuel there." Too uncomfortable to argue, Willow agreed. Within an hour, they were at the ranch, and Blake was leading her to a secluded bend in the creek where the water pooled deeply before continuing its journey. It's safe for swimming, he assured her. I'll leave you to cool off in privacy. He pointed to a nearby cottonwood. I'll be reading over there, out of sight but within earshot if you need anything. Once alone, Willow removed Samuel's gown, leaving him in just his diaper as she dabbled his chubby limbs in the cool water. His delighted squeals brought a smile to her face. After ensuring he was content on a blanket in the shade, Willow removed her shoes and stockings, then gathered her courage and hitched her skirts above her knees, wading into the creek. The cold water was a blessed relief against her skin, and she found herself venturing deeper, until the water swirled around her thighs. Lost in the sensation, she didn't hear Blake's approach until he spoke. "I brought some lemonade," he said, his voice startling her so that she nearly lost her footing on the slippery creek bottom. Blake lunged forward, catching her arm to steady her, his eyes widening as he realized the impropriety of the situation. Willow with her skirts hiked up, her bare legs visible in the clear water. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, releasing her arm and stepping back. "I should have called out." Willow felt a blush rising from her throat to her cheeks, but not entirely from embarrassment. The way Blake had looked at her in that moment had sent a thrill through her body, a reminder that she was not just a mother or a teacher, but a woman. "It's all right," she assured him, carefully making her way back to the bank. "The water is wonderful." Blake kept his eyes studiously averted as she emerged, only looking up when she had settled her skirts properly around her ankles. "Samuel seems to be enjoying himself," he observed, nodding toward the baby, who was contentedly examining a leaf. Willow smiled. "He likes being outdoors. He rarely fusses when we're at the ranch." Something in Blake's expression shifted at her words. "Willow," he began, his voice rougher than usual, "I've been meaning to ask you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes." Blake took a step closer, his blue eyes intense. "These past few months, getting to know you and Samuel, they've been the happiest of my life." Willow's breath caught in her throat. "They've been wonderful for us too." "I want more," Blake said simply. "More days like this, more of you and Samuel at the ranch, more of your smile and his laughter." He took her hand in his. "I want a life with you both." "Blake," Willow whispered, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I'm not asking for an answer today," he continued. "I know you've been hurt, that trust doesn't come easily anymore, but I want you to know my intentions. I love you, Willow Foster. And I love that boy over there as if he were my own blood." Tears filled Willow's eyes. "I don't know what to say," Blake smiled gently. "You don't have to say anything now, just think about it, about us, about what kind of life we could build together." Before she could respond, Samuel let out a cry, and Willow turned automatically toward her son. By the time she had soothed him, the moment had passed, but Blake's words remained, echoing in her heart. That night, after returning to her small home behind the schoolhouse, Willow sat beside Samuel's cradle, watching her son sleep as she considered Blake's declaration. She had no doubt of her feelings for him somewhere along the way. The gratitude and attraction she'd initially felt had deepened into love, but love had betrayed her before. Charles had professed to love her too, until loving her became inconvenient, yet Blake was nothing like Charles. Where Charles had been smooth and practiced, Blake was straightforward and honest. Where Charles had hidden their relationship, ashamed to be seen with a mere employee, Blake proudly walked beside her through town, unconcerned with gossip or status. And the way he looked at Samuel, with genuine affection rather than reluctant obligation. That was perhaps the greatest difference of all. As July turned to August, Blake's patience never wavered. He continued his courtship, never pressing for an answer to his unspoken proposal, content to let Willow come to her decision in her own time. And slowly, day by day, her fears began to recede in the face of his steady devotion. The opportunity to respond came unexpectedly, during a Saturday visit to the ranch. Jim and Pete had taken Samuel for a tour of the barn, the baby securely cradled in Jim's experienced arms. He had 3 children of his own in town. Alone for a rare moment, Blake and Willow stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I've been thinking," Willow said softly, "about what you said at the creek, about wanting a life with me and Samuel." Blake turned to her, his expression carefully neutral despite the hope that flared in his eyes. "And what have you decided?" Willow took a deep breath. "I've decided that I'm tired of letting fear dictate my choices, that Samuel deserves a father who will love him and teach him to be a good man. And that I deserve a chance at happiness with someone who sees me for who I am, not what I can offer or what mistakes I've made." Blake's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. "Is that a yes, Willow Foster?" She smiled up at him, her heart fuller than she had thought possible. "Yes, Blake Morgan, that's a yes." His answering smile was like the sunrise breaking over the mountains. With gentle reverence, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her their first kiss, sweet and tender and full of promise. When they parted, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I'll make you happy," he vowed. "Both of you." "You already do," Willow whispered. The wedding took place in September after the harvest, but before the harsh Wyoming winter set in. The entire town turned out for the occasion, the small church overflowing with well-wishers. Margaret, as Blake's only family, stood beaming beside him, while Mrs. Peterson held Samuel, who was dressed in a new outfit specially made for the occasion by the women of Sweetwater. Willow wore a simple white dress, her dark hair adorned with wildflowers Blake had gathered that morning. As she walked down the aisle toward him, she felt none of the doubts or fears that had plagued her for so long, only certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the hushed church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Blake Morgan and Willow Foster in holy matrimony." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When Blake slipped the gold band onto her finger, a band he'd ridden all the way to Laramie to purchase, Willow felt the last remnants of her old life fall away, replaced by the promise of the new one they were building together. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Blake's kiss was gentle, but filled with a promise of passion to come, drawing good-natured cheers from the congregation. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, Margaret stepped forward with Samuel in her arms. "I believe this young man wants to congratulate his parents," she said, passing the baby to Blake. The sight of her new husband holding her son, his face alight with pride and love, brought tears to Willow's eyes. This was her family now, not born of obligation or societal expectations, but of choice and love. The celebration continued at the Sweetwater Inn, where Margaret had prepared a feast with the help of the town's women. As evening fell, Blake led Willow away from the festivities, Samuel sleeping soundly in his arms. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Morgan?" he asked, his voice warm with promise. "Home," Willow repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, I believe I am." They had decided that Willow would continue teaching until the term's end in December, staying in the teachers' quarters during the week and joining Blake at the ranch on weekends. After Christmas, a new teacher would take her place, and she would move permanently to the ranch with Samuel. But tonight was special, their wedding night. Blake had arranged for Jim and Pete to stay in town, leaving the ranch house private for the newlyweds. As they drove out of town, Samuel sleeping peacefully in a basket at their feet, Willow leaned against her husband's solid shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Happy?" Blake asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "When I stepped off that train with Samuel crying in my arms, I never imagined that a nosy cowboy would change your life," Blake teased. Willow laughed softly. "That I would find home in a place I'd never been, with a man I'd never met." Blake's arm tightened around her. "You know, I almost didn't go to the station that day. Had business in town but was planning to head back to the ranch. Something made me wait for that train." "Providence," Willow suggested. "Providence," Blake agreed, "or the best kind of luck." The ranch house was lit with lamps when they arrived, a fire crackling in the hearth against the September evening chill. Blake had clearly prepared for their arrival, with fresh flowers on the table and the bedroom door standing slightly ajar, revealing crisp new bedding. "Welcome home," he said simply as he carried their bags inside. While Blake settled Samuel in the cradle he'd moved into the second bedroom, Willow stood in the main room, taking in the space that was now her home. It was a good house, sturdy and practical, but with touches of beauty in the handcrafted furniture and colorful quilts. When Blake returned, he found her still standing there, overcome with emotion. Having second thoughts, he asked, only half joking. Willow shook her head. Just grateful. For everything that led me here, even the painful parts. Blake crossed to her, taking her hands in his. I'm the grateful one, Willow Morgan. The name sounded right on his lips. You've given me more than I ever thought to have: a wife, a son, a family. We've given each other a second chance, Willow corrected gently. Blake's smile was tender as he drew her close. A second chance, he agreed, and I intend to make the most of it. As his lips met hers, Willow knew with absolute certainty that the crying baby at the train station had led her not just to a helper that day, but to the love of her life and the father her son deserved. In the years that followed, the Morgan family thrived. The ranch prospered under Blake's careful management, expanding to become one of the most successful operations in the territory. Willow found fulfillment not just as a wife and mother, but as the unofficial teacher of the growing number of children who lived on neighboring ranches, too far from town for regular schooling. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed Blake everywhere, soaking up knowledge about cattle and horses, weather and land. He never questioned that Blake was his father in every way that mattered, and Willow's heart swelled with love watching them together. In their third year of marriage, Willow gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Rose, after Blake's sister, who had welcomed Willow so warmly from the beginning. 2 years later, William James joined the family, completing their happiness. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and she sat with Blake on the porch, watching the stars appear over their land, Willow marveled at the journey that had brought her here from desperate single mother to beloved wife and mother of 3, respected throughout the county for her kindness and wisdom. "What are you thinking about?" Blake would often ask, finding her lost in such reflections. And Willow would smile, leaning into the strong shoulder that had first supported her on a train platform when her baby wouldn't stop crying. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the worst moments lead to the best beginnings," she would say. "And how grateful I am that you were there to hold us both when we needed it most." Blake would press a kiss to her temple, his arm tightening around her. "Best decision I ever made," he'd murmur, offering to hold that crying baby, and his beautiful mother too. And in those moments, surrounded by the life they'd built together, Willow knew that sometimes happy endings weren't just the stuff of fairy tales. Sometimes they began at a dusty train station with a crying baby and a cowboy's gentle offer to help. The Sweetwater Valley witnessed the passing of seasons and years as the Morgan family put down deep roots in its fertile soil. Blake's ranch grew from a promising start to one of the territory's premier cattle operations, known for quality stock and fair dealings. As Wyoming moved toward statehood in 1890, Blake found himself increasingly involved in local politics, respected for his straightforward manner and clear thinking. Willow watched with pride as her husband became a leader in the community, even as she continued her own quiet influence through the education of local children. The schoolroom she established in a converted bunkhouse on their property became known throughout the county, drawing students from as far as 20 miles away during the summer months when travel was easier. Samuel, now 13, had his father's height and his mother's thoughtful nature. No one who saw him working alongside Blake would ever question the bond between them. It was written in every shared glance, every instance of unspoken communication, every proud smile Blake couldn't suppress when Samuel mastered a new skill. 10-year-old Margaret Rose Maggie to everyone but her mother when she was in trouble had inherited Blake's blue eyes and Willow's dark hair, along with a spirited nature all her own. She divided her time between helping with her younger brother and shadowing Samuel and Blake, determined not to be left out of ranch operations because she was a girl. William, at 8, was the image of his father, but with his mother's gentle disposition. He loved books as much as horses, often found reading in the hayloft when he was supposed to be doing chores. On a warm June morning in 1892, the family gathered around the breakfast table, the windows open to catch the sweet prairie breeze. "Samuel," Blake said, passing the platter of biscuits, "I'll need your help with the new calves today. Time they learned what a branding iron is. Samuel nodded, his expression serious. Yes, sir, I've been practicing my roping like you showed me. Can I help too, Papa? Maggie asked, her blue eyes pleading. I'm strong enough. Blake exchanged a glance with Willow, who nodded slightly. You can help with the counting and record keeping, he decided. Every ranch needs good records. Maggie's face fell slightly, but she nodded. At 10, she was old enough to understand that compromise was sometimes necessary. What about me? William asked, looking up from his book. You, young man, Willow said, have arithmetic lessons this morning, but this afternoon, if your sums are correct, you may help your father and brother. As breakfast concluded and the children scattered to their morning tasks, Blake lingered at the table with Willow, his hand covering hers. 15 years, he said softly. Willow looked at him questioningly. 15 years. Since I saw you standing on that platform with Samuel crying in your arms, Blake explained. 15 years this coming September. Warmth spread through Willow's chest at the realization that her husband had been counting, remembering. The best 15 years of my life, she said softly. Blake's thumb traced circles on her palm. I've been thinking. Samuel's old enough now to take on more responsibility around here, and Jim's boy is nearly ready for full-time work. What are you suggesting? Willow asked, though she could read the answer in his eyes. I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for us to take that trip east we've talked about. Show the children Boston, New York, maybe even let them see the ocean. Willow's heart quickened. They had discussed such a journey for years, but the demands of the ranch and young children had always made it impractical. Now, though, do you mean it? She asked, unable to hide her excitement. Though she loved Wyoming with all her heart, a part of her had always missed the cultural riches of the East. Blake nodded. We could go in October after the fall roundup. Stay through Christmas, perhaps. The children should see more of the world than just Wyoming territory, even if this is the best part of it. Willow leaned across the table to kiss him, her heart full. Have I told you lately that I love you, Blake Morgan? His smile was as warm as it had been on that first day. Not since last night, Mrs. Morgan, but I never tire of hearing it. The journey east that fall was everything Willow had hoped for and more. The children's wonder at their first sight of the ocean, the gasp of delight when they entered the grand museums of New York, the awe on their faces at the bustling streets of Boston, these were memories Willow would treasure always. But it was in Boston that the past unexpectedly intersected with the present. They were touring the public garden, the children running ahead to examine the swan boats when Willow froze, her hand tightening on Blake's arm. What is it? He asked, immediately alert to her distress. That man, Willow said quietly, nodding toward a well-dressed gentleman walking with a fashionably attired woman and two small children. That's Charles Ellsworth. Blake's posture stiffened, his jaw tightening as he regarded the man who had once abandoned his wife and unborn child. Do you want to leave? Willow considered the question, watching as Samuel, tall, strong, and confident, helped his younger siblings onto a bench for a better view of the pond. She looked back at Charles, who appeared every inch the successful Boston businessman, and found that the sight of him stirred no emotion in her heart, no anger, no bitterness, not even curiosity. No, she said finally. No, I don't think I do. As if sensing their gaze, Charles glanced in their direction. For a moment, confusion crossed his face as he looked at Willow, as if trying to place her. Then recognition dawned, followed by a flicker of something that might have been shame before he quickly looked away, hurrying his family in the opposite direction. He recognized you, Blake observed. Yes, Willow said, and he chose to walk away, again. Blake's arm went around her waist, strong and secure. His loss, he said simply. In every possible way. Willow leaned into her husband's embrace, watching their children laugh together in the autumn sunlight. I used to wonder what I would say if I ever saw him again. If I would confront him about abandoning us, or if I would simply introduce Samuel and show him what he gave up. And now, Blake asked. Now I realize there's nothing to say, Willow said. Because while he gave Samuel life, you gave him everything else: love, security, a good name, an example of what a man should be. You're his father in all the ways that truly matter. Blake's eyes were suspiciously bright as he pressed a kiss to her temple. I'm the fortunate one. I got a ready-made son and the most beautiful wife in Wyoming territory. In all the territories, Willow corrected with a smile. In the entire United States of America, Blake countered, making her laugh. Later that evening, as they prepared for bed in their hotel room, Willow found herself reflecting on the chance encounter. You know, she said thoughtfully, seeing Charles today made me realize something. Blake paused in unbuttoning his shirt. What's that? If he hadn't rejected me, if he had married me as he should have, I would never have come west, never have been standing on that platform in Sweetwater with a crying baby, never have met you. She crossed to him, placing her hands on his chest. And that would have been the greatest tragedy of my life. Blake gathered her close, his heartbeat steady beneath her palms. I've always believed that some things are meant to be, Willow. That day at the station, you and Samuel were meant to come into my life. I was meant to be there when that train arrived. Providence, Willow murmured, echoing their conversation from years earlier. Providence, Blake agreed, tilting her face up to his, or the best kind of luck. As his lips met hers in a kiss as tender as their first, Willow knew with absolute certainty that the path that had seemed so dark and frightening 15 years ago had led her exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of the man who had first offered to hold her crying baby, and then had held her heart with equal care ever since. The years continued to unfold for the Morgan family, each season bringing new challenges and joys. Samuel grew into a fine young man who partnered with his father to expand the ranch's operations, introducing modern breeding techniques he'd learned during a year at agricultural college back east. At 21, he married Emma Peterson, his childhood friend who had once rocked him as an infant in the Sweetwater schoolhouse, bringing Willow's story full circle in a way that felt like poetic justice. Maggie, as spirited as ever, shocked the county by attending college in Denver and returning with a degree in business, determined to modernize the ranch's accounting and marketing. The fact that she brought home a husband, a soft-spoken professor of literature who adored both her and Wyoming, was less surprising to her parents, who had always known their daughter's heart was as big as her ambitions. William, the quietest of their children, found his voice through writing, publishing stories about frontier life in magazines back east, bringing the reality of Wyoming to readers who had only known it through dime novels and sensationalized accounts. Through it all, Blake and Willow remained the steady center of the family, their love deepening with each passing year. The gray that gradually appeared in Blake's dark hair, the lines that formed at the corners of Willow's eyes, these were badges of a life well lived, of happiness earned through both good times and challenges overcome together. On a warm September evening in 1903, 25 years after their first meeting, Blake and Willow sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar hues of orange and pink. Their home had expanded over the years, with additions to accommodate their growing family, but the porch remained their special place. 25 years, Willow mused, her head resting against Blake's shoulder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stepped off that train with Samuel crying in my arms. And sometimes it feels like you've always been here, Blake replied, his arm secure around her waist, as if my life didn't truly begin until you arrived. From inside the house came the sounds of their family gathering for dinner, Samuel and Emma's children laughing as they helped set the table, Maggie's voice as she discussed a new book with her husband, William's quiet responses. "We've been blessed," Willow said softly. Blake nodded, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Beyond measure. As twilight deepened into dusk, they remained on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the Wyoming sky. Their hands, weathered now by years of work and weather, remained intertwined just as they had been since that day at the Sweetwater station when a crying baby had brought them together. And in the gentle night breeze, Willow could almost hear the echo of words spoken long ago. "Let me hold him." "I'll hold you too." Words that had changed the course of two lives and created a legacy of love that would endure far beyond their years, a legacy born from a moment of kindness when a cowboy had offered his arms to a mother and child in need, and in doing so, had found his own heart's home.